Welcome. On behalf of St. Paul's College and the Arthur V. Mauro Institute for Peace and Justice at St. Paul's College, welcome. A very good evening to each and every one of you. My name is Dr. Stanley Amolidis, and I'm the director of the Mauro Institute for Peace and Justice right here on campus. Dr. Christopher Adams, our rector at St. Paul's College, sends his regrets. He's not here for personal reasons. Allow me now to proceed by acknowledging the land upon which we stand or sit. And I quote, "The University of Manitoba campuses and research spaces are located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Ininiwak, Anissiniwak, Dakota, Oyate, Dene, Inuit, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities and in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration," unquote. This panel on compassion this evening is the second of two Shefrin dialogues, peace dialogues on peace and conflict resolution. It's funded by Hersh and Arna Shefrin. Now, Hersh and Arna's purpose is clear, namely to establish a dialogue series by inviting two or more high-level speakers with different views of a specific conflict to present and exchange perspectives related to peace, justice, and conflict resolution. Hersh and Arna Shefrin are proud alumni of the University of Manitoba. Both were honored by the university as alumni of distinction for their accomplishments in academia and in non-academic world, using constructive dialogue to work for peace is an issue they care passionately about. So let me quickly outline the process for this evening. First, as the moderator for this panel, I will introduce the panelists. The second, the panelists will take some time, 5 minutes or so, to talk about their own personal history with this topic on compassion. Third, I will ask them other questions, some that they have prepared and some they may not have. So it will be kind of an interesting to watch, eh? And fourth, I will then turn to you to raise any questions or have a conversation with the panelists. Above all else, I hope, we hope, for a constructive and respectful conversation. And so, let me introduce the panelists. As you see, there are two of them here, and one, former police chief Devon Clunas, who was from Jamaica and is back in Jamaica and is piping in from Jamaica. Welcome to the world of technology. So let me start with Devon Clunas. Devon immigrated from Jamaica to Winnipeg at the age of 11 in 1975. He faced significant cultural challenges at the start. With the help of key difference makers at an early age, Devon determined he would become an agent of social change. Devon served 29 years in the Winnipeg Police Service, culminating in historic tenure as Canada's first Black Chief of Police from 2012 to 2016. Known for his professionalism, integrity, and innovative problem solving, he made significant contributions to community safety and policing best practices across Canada and the United States. Personally, I've had the pleasure of working with Devon on a wonderful project that we are putting together. It's on hosting the inaugural International Peace Summit, which will be taking place in 2027. So whatever you do, stick around. We want to see you there. Dr. Shauna Labman. Dr. Labman is a legal scholar who writes and speaks extensively on refugee law, resettlement, and private refugee sponsorship within the broader context of human rights and public international law. She focuses on the layered influences of law on public policy and government positioning. She has previously worked for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in New Delhi, Canadian Embassy in Beijing, Law Commission of Canada in Ottawa, Workers' Compensation Board of BC, and the Nunavut Court of Justice in Iqaluit. Whoa. Fabulous, huh? Now, just before we began, Shauna shared something with me, and I must share it with you. At the University of Winnipeg Global College, of which she's an executive director, it is the only undergraduate human rights program in Western Canada, where students are given the space to talk about very different and difficult issues to talk about. Talk that is being censored in the United States today. And what a wonderful opportunity it is for us to have this space to be able to converse about the very things we need to talk about. And so, welcome and thank you. Last but not least, Dr. Bob Christmas, who served for over 40 years in various law enforcement roles, including 34 years with the Winnipeg Police Service. He was awarded a 2017 Distinguished Dissertation Award for his groundbreaking research and publications on sex trafficking in Canada. In his new role with the community safety team, Bob has drawn on all of his experience and education to build a team with culture and vision, founded in compassion for vulnerable people while improving public safety. On a personal note, I want to say that as we were working to prepare for this panel, I was simply amazed and humbled by their sense of humility. So I would like, for the first time, to introduce Bob, to say a few words at the beginning of his presentation, and then I will turn it to Shauna for 5 minutes to share what she needs to share. And then, Devon, you can pipe in after that, and I'll give you a cue for it, okay? I need to remember, I need to look at you here, not there. Okay, Bob?
I offered to go to Jamaica and do this, but the logistics just didn't work out. I normally do better unscripted, so I might do better in the Q&A session of this. But as I thought about this, there's some really important points that I really want to make sure I don't miss, so I brought some bullets to refer to. This is a small crowd, but it actually is a humbling crowd because there's some serious VIPs and serious scholars in the crowd, so I'm a little bit nervous about it. But I was really excited about having this opportunity to come and talk about something that's become quite dear to my heart, I guess, recently, is just thinking and writing and actually leading with compassion. And so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight, and this was just a great opportunity. So, who here has heard the term NIMBY? Raise your hands, be honest. Not in my backyard. Who's said it? Who's actually said it out loud? Yeah, I think if we're being brutally honest, we've all said it at some point, right? So I feel too many of us think social issues are someone else's problem. I actually, my daughter Chelsea is here. Her twin sister Brandy did her master's in peace and conflict studies. And Brandy's Skyping in because she's at home with a toddler, actually an infant. But she and I just recently penned a chapter that we're publishing on NIMBYism and how to overcome it and how to call people to action in the community. So that's what I hope to talk and impart a little bit about tonight. We all need to play a part in solving social problems, and that's what I hope to talk about. First, we don't have to travel the world to conflict zones where human atrocities are occurring to find a place to exercise compassion amid conflict and violence. People right here in our city live with soul-crushing oppression, structural violence of poverty, homelessness, racism, addictions, and a troubled healthcare system. I'm sure that people live as rough here as they do in a Rohingya refugee camp, where there's 1 million people right now. In the blurb about this talk, we talked about compassion and whether it's pollyannish. Pollyanna is the heroine of the 1913 novel by Eleanor Hodgman Porter. Pollyanna was known for being unrealistically optimistic and naive. I don't think compassion is naive. I think it's the only way to make a real impact on humanity. Reflecting on my professional journey, each stage has shaped my perspective on how we can make meaningful change. My doctoral research took me on a deep dive into sex trafficking in Canada. I found we need to be more client-centered and meet people where they're at. Too often we find ourselves serving systems we build rather than the people we serve. Compassion is caring less about the systems we use and more about the people we want to help. And that includes the people that we work with and who we want to empower in this kind of work. Tonight, I hope to share some lessons I've learned about balancing the needs of individuals with the demands of complex systems. It's what drives my passion in this work. My colleagues and I have built a community safety team for the city based on compassion, dedicated to protecting public safety while supporting vulnerable residents in urgent need. And I'm pleased to say almost my entire leadership from that team is here tonight. Could you raise your hand? Yeah, I'm so proud of these guys, and they've embraced this vision, and we're making it happen together, trying to lead with compassion. I've been in public service for 45 years, 34 years in policing. I'm not sure how much of my community commitment was born out of my growing experience in the public service realm, my volunteer work, or my grad studies. But somewhere along the way, I started to have a deeper sense of my service to the community and humanity. I spent most of my career doing the best I could for every individual I had the privilege to serve, always advocating for victims. And two of my leadership team are from both from long careers in policing, and they know what I'm talking about. Every case has a victim that we're trying to support, and really that's who you end up working for. I believe, as do many in the world, that if we save one life, we save all of humanity. It means meeting people where they're at. Throughout my public service career, I came to realize I could do more and better for the community by improving systems, developing resources to help larger numbers of people, not just individuals. This professional journey has taught me that systems could be designed to serve people and not the other way around. By focusing on compassion at every level, we create environments where individuals feel seen and supported, and where teams are empowered to respond effectively to the unique needs of the community. I've tried to bring that aspect of compassionate service to our community safety team. And I was given a great deal of latitude in building it. And a big focus we have, as far as I'm concerned, is avoiding NIMBYism. So we're meeting challenges in the community head on and taking ownership for them rather than saying it's maybe some other department or some other people's problem. The most meaningful progress often comes from when we listen deeply to those we serve and adapt our approaches to fit their realities. So I'm thankful for the Shefrin family, the Mauro Institute, my alma mater here, Dr. Amalatus, Devon, and Shauna for facilitating this important discussion. It's important not only at this point in time, but critical as a guide to where we could end up in the future, when, as Gandhi said, we'll be judged as a society on how we treated our most vulnerable citizens. So I'll leave it at that for now, but thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to stay seated. It's funny, we've had an in-person meeting about this and many, many emails and conversation between the four of us, and yet everything that Bob said was new to me, and it was really lovely to learn from him and hear. Stan, I want to thank you for inviting me into this conversation. I think it's forced me to think about and reflect upon the idea of compassion in a way that I had not. I'm a lawyer. I tend to think about rights. I tend to think about responsibilities and advocate on that basis, and don't really think about the compassion that necessarily underlines the motivation to advocate in those ways. I also want to acknowledge that this feels like a harder conversation today than it did when Stan asked me to join this panel back in the spring. It feels like a harder conversation today than it did 2.5 weeks ago. And it feels like a harder conversation today than even it did yesterday, because our world keeps pushing us in directions where conflict and polarizing views are in our face and in our children's faces and in our parents' faces. And it's become harder and harder to feel you understand what's going on, to feel that the conversations you're in align with even your friends and your family all the time. And so I think talking about compassion is hard to do. So yeah, the world feels very hard right now. Feels harder than I can remember it feeling in my lifetime, and I can reflect about that a bit more in the further conversation. And I'm not sure that today I'll be able to really offer us anything that particularly helps, or that I hold any expertise to be able to do that. At a general level, compassion means sharing in the feelings of hurt, pain, suffering of others, and a drive to do something about that, a drive to alleviate that pain, alleviate that suffering, fix the hurt, remedy something. And sometimes, honestly, this doesn't feel that hard to do. So as Stan mentioned, I used to work for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in New Delhi. And so as a newbie lawyer, a very young lawyer, I moved to India to work for the UN. And my job involved doing refugee status determinations for refugees who came into India, and also looking at resettlement opportunities, making referrals to those who were in India but didn't have a durable solution. And so my day every day as a young privileged lawyer from Canada was listening to people retell the most horrendous stories of the worst moments of their lives, when they faced persecution, when they lost family members, when they were treated horrendously, and having to make or fight for the opportunities to change their lives in some way. And I often describe that to my students as feeling like I had the blinders lifted, because in that moment, my understanding of the world, my understanding of refugee rights came from the Canadian context that I'd studied in law school, came from seeing only those refugees who actually had the fortune, and fewer do, but had the fortune of coming and being able to access the protection that Canada offers. And working in India made me much more aware of the broader world of terror and horror and hardness that people find it very difficult to escape. And so when I think back on that, and that motivated me to do further work, it motivated me to do grad school. I've written books on refugee resettlement and refugee law. I've spoken to policy, to government, trying to advocate on all of this. And that was pushed by compassion. That was pushed by seeing a problem and a suffering and wanting to find ways to make it better, have better processes, have better policies, get rid of some of the myths, some of the misleading rhetoric around the need for protection. And that's the kind of compassion I can understand clearly. But I think in this panel, what Stan's asked us to do is talk about leading with compassion. And when I think about leading with compassion, I think it requires more. A leader has to look for compassion when the world feels kind of close to it. Leaders are forced to kind of think about what to do when there's a conflict, when perspectives, like they are far too often right now, quite polarized, when there is division, and when the compassion that does exist feels siloed, feels pointed in one direction but not others, and some people feel seen and others don't. And that division is problematic. And finding that broader compassion, finding the ability to create a space to move forward, to create dialogue, and to move to a change that can alleviate suffering or hurt on all fronts, and move us all forward is a harder thing to find. It's a harder thing to do. And so when I think about that, and I honestly don't think about it that often until the last 2 months when I've been going, oh my goodness, I have to talk about compassion. What am I going to say? And the world just felt like in a place where compassion was falling. I think compassion means you can't mute or smother debate. I think it means looking for some level of commonality and truth. I think it requires stepping back. I think it requires making space. And I think it requires being open when everything feels closed. And that's not a moment, it's not an event, it's not a social media post. It's a sustained struggle to hold tensions and to hold all that complexity. And in my role now as a university professor in a program of human rights, where we have students coming from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of experiences with all sorts of beliefs and ideas, and they're there to talk about some of the most complicated issues that we face in the day. I think that's the kind of space we're trying to create. And I'll leave it there for now, but I'm happy to explore that further.
Great. Thank you. Devon.
Good evening, Stan, and good evening to my fellow panelists and audience members from Jamaica. I don't think anybody's feeling jealous of me because I understand the weather is still pretty nice in Winnipeg right now. Can you hear me well, Stan?
Perfect.
Perfect. So thank you very much for convening this conversation. I really appreciated what both Bob and Shauna had to say so far, and I hope certainly what I have to add will actually just bring this all fully together. I'd like to start 2 questions, and these are questions that I've posed to well over 19,000 plus Canadians and a few Americans, and see what your responses will be. How many of you are satisfied with the state of the world? And Stan, just gauge and let me know how many hands go up. How many of you are satisfied with the state of the world?
None.
None. I can tell you to this point, 19 plus thousand Canadians, I've only had 4 hands go up when I asked that question. So that tells us where we're at. We're not very satisfied with the way things are. The second question is this: how many of you are optimistic that things will change for the better? How many? I'm hoping there'll be a couple hands at least, Stan.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay,
7,
so
8.
Okay, 8 out of.
Can you repeat the
of,
question, Devon?
how many of you are optimistic that things will change for the better?
more than 12.
Okay. I don't know what percentage that is of the entire audience, but I can tell you out of the 19 plus thousand, I might get maybe 5% of the hands that will go up to that second question. And so we realize that most of us are very dissatisfied with the state of the world. Not many of us are incredibly optimistic, but I think we want optimism. We want a better world. We want a better future. Now, the reason I'm here in Jamaica, I would say it's on a bit of a compassionate mission. Back to work in schools to create a better future for the young boys and young girls who, when I walk into those schools, they look a lot like me. And there are about 82 or so of us here working for 2 weeks in schools in Jamaica. Now, obviously, I have this very strong connection to Jamaica. It is the land of my birth, and it keeps calling me back because I remember what life was like for myself there, and I see what the life is like for the young people there. And I like to come back just to show them what the potential is for the future. That simply because of where they're starting, that doesn't need to be the ending point. And I think about today, I had 2 little boys come up to me. The teacher brought them up to me, and they're reading the little boy from Jamaica, and they're saying, "That's him." And just the look on their faces. And she said, "I want you to know that there's so much hope, so much potential for the future." That's what I see in terms of compassion. And I want to share something very personal with you. When I first arrived here and we started walking up and down the beach, this was on Saturday, I ran into this gentleman, and he's somebody who you would describe as being homeless. And, you know, he's selling little trinkets, and I bought something from him just simply because I wanted to support him. But yesterday he was out there again, and yesterday I gave him just some money to go buy some food. And today I picked up a whole bunch of food from the resort, and I went out to find this gentleman. And I found him when he was sitting around some other individuals who, again, we would describe as homeless. And his name is Danny. And I said, "Danny, I have these things for you." And I started to give it to him. And immediately as I gave it to him, it would go right through his hands. He would give it to somebody else in the crowd. And I thought, this is incredible. Here's somebody who really doesn't have much of anything, and I'm giving him all of this, but he's not hoarding it. He's not keeping it to himself. He's sharing it with others. And I thought for me, that was the ultimate example of what compassion really truly is. Now, when I see the suffering that's taking place here in Jamaica, I have to tell you immediately, my heart turns back to Winnipeg. Now, in Jamaica, it's very difficult for us to alleviate all of the suffering that we see. But when I see what's taking place in our city, in our country, I feel even more burdensome because I believe that we have all of the resources, we have the know-how to actually alleviate suffering. And I wonder if we would learn from Danny's example that as all of these resources come to us, they pass through our hands to somebody else who has much less. One of my favorite quotes is by cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead, and she said that, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." You and I agree that we don't like the state of the world today. And who is going to change it? We can't wait for any elected officials, people in high positions of authority or power. It's incumbent upon every single one of us that when we receive something, and I have to say that every single one of us who's listened to the sound of my voice, the vast majority of us in Winnipeg, we have so much. And if we're willing to do like that gentleman today, who we would consider to be homeless in Jamaica, that when we have all of these resources, we're just going to share it with one another and those who have much less, I think we can bring social equity right across our city. And my desire for the city of Winnipeg is this. I truly want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, I want the city of Winnipeg to be that shining example to the rest of the world in terms of how we do community well. And for me, compassion truly is at the heart of all of that. When I think about my career in the Winnipeg Police Service, I took over our service in 2012 when we were the murder capital and crime capital of the country. And at that time, people really believed what we needed was more police and more police officers. I was really fortunate because I had the opportunity to work with now Dr. Bob Christmas, and we said, no, we need to do something radically different. So we started talking about crime prevention through social development. And what does that look like? That means that we're not simply going to look at the symptoms, we're going to try and deal with the root causes and bring that sense of equity. So we said simply, we're not going to put more police officers on the streets. I'm going to have my officers think about how can we actually help create a better environment for every single person in our community? I remember clearly seeing young people who were being exploited in the sex trade. And rather than simply going out and seeing them as the problem, we changed the Vice Division to the Counter Exploitation Unit, something that Dr. Christmas knows a lot about. And rather than seeing individuals being exploited as a problem, we started dealing with the real problem, which were those who were exploiting them. People caught up in the gang trade. Rather than simply seeing them as the problem, it was the members within the gang unit who came to me and said, after we've dealt with somebody caught up in that type of activity, how about the next day we go back to the home and see if there are any individuals in the home, young kids, that we can say we can put some wraparound services to support everyone in the family. That's what we're talking about. Not simply seeing it as a job, but saying with a compassionate lens, how can we actually help to improve the conditions for everyone in our city? And by the time I retired, Winnipeg had seen a massive drop in crime, not because we put more police officers on the street. I can tell you every single year, we gave money back to the city. And many times I would say to the city, cut my budget, but I want you to put that money into social services. That's taking a more compassionate view to how we police, how we do social services. And I truly believe that if we start dealing with all of these issues through a compassionate lens, not that we're simply trying to police, that we can actually help change things in our city. I'm going to leave it there for now and take any other questions that you might have.
Thank you, Devon. Now comes the tough part, huh? What I really appreciated and I heard from all of you, that compassion is grounded in this desire to alleviate the pain, to alleviate the suffering. It's not naive and moved by the desire to want to help at all levels. So, first question that I had, we have a sector of people that we say, you need help. I am coming for help. I'm coming there. But I've got another group of people which you termed NIMBY. So I'll create a new language, the NIMBYers. How do I show compassion to NIMBYers? How do I begin to open NIMBYers to engage in a conversation about those who need help? What are the conditions that enable NIMBYers to be NIMBYers? What are they afraid of? What do they want?
I guess that's for me. Am I on? Yeah. It's an interesting question, and I appreciate it because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing in our community safety team. It's actually pretty natural to come to thinking about compassion and bringing compassion to the work for us because we're at street level with our hands on, like actually working with people. So it's not an abstract concept for us. We're actually helping somebody up out of the, who's living in the street. And the way we have to do that, if we're to separate compassion from confusing it with empathy, as my friend Christine has been apt to point out, you need to consider what are your intentions. I mentioned in my opening remarks that the way we make progress is by listening deeply. And one thing that I've tried to bring to my work and with my team is to avoid a colonial attitude of, oh, you're homeless, so we're going to help you. This is what we're going to do. That's a very colonial attitude about things. So we're trying to meet people where they're at and actually understand their situation. And I think that that's where the compassion can come in with talking with middle-class, tax-paying, hard-working citizens, because we've come to evolve and live in a society that is so fast-paced that most of us never really slow down and smell the roses at all. So you're walking around with your face in a cell phone. We work in the walkway downtown, and I often joke with people, like, they're walking around with their face in their cell phone, like, careful you don't fall down a manhole, an open manhole, like the old Bugs Bunny cartoon. Like, if you actually park your car and go for a walk, and you can see so much more of what's going on around you, and just slow down and cut the technology a bit and listen. So I think the way we can bring compassion to people who have a not in my backyard perspective is to show that we understand that we all have our challenges, but we all have a responsibility to play in solving the social problems that are going on in our city. It's not someone else's problem. It's actually your problem. And a huge finding that I had with my doctoral research into sex trafficking was NIMBYism. That's where I came to think about that a lot. And so many people think that it's only happening in the North End, it's only happening downtown, it's not in my backyard, so it's not my issue. But it actually is, because it's a corrosion of our values that we all share in society, and the even an economist would agree with me that it impacts them, because they're paying for the justice system medical dollars that go into these issues when they're not solved. So a lot of people don't make that connection. So I think that compassion can flow from the desire to alleviate pain, as Dr. Imelda aptly points out. The pain of living oblivious to the problems that are going on around you. And you can't convince me that people don't feel subconsciously guilty and sad when they see people living in the street, when we live in an affluent society. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
Does anybody else want to add something
I could add to that. I fully agree with what Bob just said. You know, on a regular basis, I make sure that I drive down Main Street from Main and Higgins all the way to City Hall. I don't know how many of you do that on a regular basis, because I don't think you can drive down that stretch, you know, of Main Street without actually just feeling it to your core. I say it's almost like a moral injury, that if we could just drive down that street and not feel for the individuals who are there. And every time you drive up and down there, yes, you lose a little bit of yourself. And if you're not feeling the pain, I say that's even worse. And I say, so it's incumbent upon us to look at these individuals and treat them with compassion. But that type of compassion is not just about the individual. It really is about ourselves. I think we're doing a good deal of soul healing for ourselves when we treat people in a compassionate way. Because when we don't, as I said, I think it's just an erosion, like Bob said. So there's a moral injury that's taking place. Something else I really want every Winnipegger to realize, like, and Bob said it very clearly, it's not just a North End or an inner city issue. Because if the heart of the city is slowly breaking and it is decaying, the city is breaking and it's decaying. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that we help to heal the heart of the city. Because I can tell you that decay will slowly just flow out. You'll never be able to get away from it. And I think you can see it happening very slowly in our city. So it's really incumbent upon every single one of us to care about what's going on Main Street, in the inner city. I can tell you one of the projects I'm most proud of during my time as chief was a project we called Restore Our Core on Selkirk Avenue, where we brought people from outside the core to come and help restore Selkirk Avenue. And it was amazing what that did for the individuals who did not reside on Selkirk Avenue, but came to do that work, and also the positive impact that it had on the people who live and work on Selkirk Avenue.
Thank you, Devon. Shauna, if you want to add.
Yeah, I can jump in kind of from a different perspective, but not disagreeing with anything either of my colleagues have said. So I spent 6 years on this campus teaching in the law school, and now I've spent 6 years at the University of Winnipeg teaching in an undergraduate program with a really different student body. And one of the things, so I spend a lot of time downtown, I try and walk through downtown, and my students come from everywhere. They come from conflicts around the world and they have found themselves here. They come from the inner city. They come, as I came from a more privileged background in private schools in this city. They come from Indigenous communities in this city and outside. They come from other countries as international students who have no understanding of this place they found themselves when they often first arrive. And we put them all in a classroom together. And then we ask them to talk about issues that they don't necessarily have grounding in, that they haven't done what Bob and Devon have talked about and been exposed to, or that they've lived in so deeply for the entirety of their lives that this is nothing new or surprising to them. And we need them to all engage with each other. And the university is a beautiful place to actually do that. The classroom's a beautiful place to actually have that opportunity if you approach it with courage and if you approach it with comfort in the discomfort of creating a space to get those students to feel safe to talk to each other and to feel safe to share their ideas and to feel safe to maybe say NIMBYism out loud, to feel safe to say, I don't feel safe, or I don't know, I haven't experienced this, or this is the horror I've lived through and I'm not comfortable with this. And we taught through the pandemic where people had different perspectives on masking, on vaccination, felt different threats to their security and livelihood based on their employment. We push students to talk about sexual reproductive health and rights. We push them up in discomfort with rights articulations and religious beliefs. And the need is not for them all to come out of it thinking the same. They're not gonna think the same. And they're not gonna actually all go kumbaya, pollyannish, together happily into the world. But if they understand each other better, if they understand why other people feel differently than them, or how other people feel differently, or the parameters of why the world isn't seen through the same lens, and they come out of that, both with that and what we're trying to give them in our programs at least, is the tools of human rights. And so the language of what those rights are, what are the legitimate restrictions or limitations, how we there are gross violations of international law all around us. What are the things we can be appalled by, and how do we articulate that? Where do we take that anger? Where do we take that frustration with the world we're seeing, and how do we use these tools to advocate for change? Whether the change each and every one of us is advocating for is the same or different, how do we move forward in it? And I think what's challenging is in the university setting these days, that space doesn't always feel particularly open. It doesn't feel particularly clear for those kinds of conversations. And yet I think it's not gonna change everyone, but bringing more people into the community, and I say to my students, I hope you have conversations with your friends, with your family, with your parents, with your children, and that we extend these conversations out of the classrooms into the communities and create more space for dialogues. This conversation isn't a topical conversation about one particular issue, but it's a conversation about how we have conversations, how we might approach conversations and look at the world through compassion rather than anger, rather than frustration, rather than a fear that you're not being seen or understood by too many that surround you, which I often feel these days, to be honest. I feel we're not understanding each other well. And so this conversation is one about moving forward past that lack of understanding between different groups that can go back to Bob's example.
Thank you, Shauna.
Add to that?
Please.
So I just love the subtext here that I think that we haven't really said out loud, is that raising awareness and convincing people, yes, an important question, you know, how do we change people's spirit or their mind if they're in a NIMBYism kind of outlook. I think it takes courage to speak truth to power, to tell the truth. I think Shauna's doing it in her way. Devon has clearly done it in his way through his whole career. And I've tried every opportunity I have to speak truth to power, and just speak the truth. And I love that you mentioned the collegial learning environment of the university. It's something that I miss, because it was a safe, going to those grad seminars is always a safe place to speak openly. In fact, I learned after a while that sometimes it doesn't play well in the corporate world when you're speaking openly and unraveling and speaking the truth about what's broken in the system and what we should fix. When you bring that back to the police service or what government agency you work in, sometimes it doesn't play well. So it really, I felt the brunt of that. But I think that people who have an intent and a will to change the world and make the world a better place, as Devon puts out, I think that they need to have the courage to do it, and we all do it in our own ways. So I do it by pushing myself out of my comfort zone and doing things like this. And in every publication, that I have a pretty strong passion in publishing and putting out things that just try to raise awareness among people and tell the truth. So my webpage is, I call it Writing for Social Change. But I think we all do it in different ways.
Thank you, Bob. And in terms of publishing, Bob is going to be contributing a chapter to our book on peace leadership that will be being written by and published by Routledge. So stay tuned, huh? Two things. I loved it when you brought it back to the conversation that we have in the classroom. It reminded me, now, how many here are from the Rotary? The Rotary Club. You're very close. Now, here's a gentleman that I loved talking to, and this is what he shared with me. The debating societies. In school, we teach students to debate, correct? And we know what debates do, or what debaters do. Their skill is to tear you down, right? And the better person to tear you down is rewarded. And here's the plug for Rotary. What they are doing is going into schools and engaging in debate, but with a twist. Debaters listen to what the other has to say and look for ways to build that argument and not tear it down. So I think that could be a very unique way of rethinking listening. That's just as a summary. I want to come back to what you raised earlier, Shauna, and you threw in the language of leadership in your talk. And my field is in peace leadership, so I'll do a little bit. You know, one of the essential tasks of a leader is to create an environment where others feel the need to define their values so meaningfully that they can be moved to purposeful action. That's what we're seeing here. But the challenge now for us is, if nothing is felt, nothing matters. So how can we, with the feeling of compassion and the need to define compassion so meaningfully that others can be moved to purposeful action, how do we begin to create an environment where I can feel that need? And if I give you a quote, I'm going to ask you, can you think about who said that? Here's what one person said. In the 19th century, the world weighs down upon our shoulders like a 20,000-pound force. But do you feel it? Who do you think said that? None other than our wonderful Karl Marx, right? In the age of industrialization. Do you feel it? And he knew if nothing is felt, nothing matters. So how do I engage in a compassionate conversation where others feel the need to engage compassionately? Any one of you, please.
Can I throw out a counter? Oh, well, I think it's often in the conversations in my circles, the students, and we talk about we're feeling the weight of the world, or all the ills of the world. And it's actually almost the opposite, because we can't fix everything. You can't direct your compassion, you can't direct your advocacy, you can't direct your energy to all the things that surround us that make this world a place that so few people could raise their hands for optimism or hope in it. And I think that overwhelmingness of it can lead almost to a desensitization to it. I'm addicted to social media as bad as the next person, but I am also very, very conscious of what it can do and what it can't, and what we wrongly think we're doing through it when we're not doing much. And so I think feeling things comes out of taking, I talked about this in my intro, taking that breath, taking that step back, and starting from, what is my goal here? What is the actual change I want to see? What is the actual thing I want to accomplish through this action or through this energy that I'm putting towards something that I'm feeling? So I'll just leave it there for now.
I can share again from the experiences not only here in Jamaica, but in terms of my personal life. And I think you're right. If you think we're going to fix the entire world, I always like this, I'm going to change the world. Well, how do we do that? We start by impacting one individual. And I always share my story that it was one individual, one teacher who changed the course of my life. I've been fortunate enough to be able to help so many individuals, but it was because that one teacher helped one student. And so I say, just do one thing. We can't fix it all. There's no way you can do it all, but collectively, yes, we can. If each person every day did one simple act of kindness, I can tell you we would radically transform the world. And we really need to break it down to make it that simple, because yes, otherwise it'll be overwhelming. So just to be able to influence your sphere, we cannot do it all. I've really realized now I can't change the entire world, but by coming to Jamaica, we have kids who are in grade 6 who cannot read. But by changing the course of that one child's life, by teaching them how to read at grade 6, it's amazing when you see the light just go on in their eyes when they can actually read, they can understand what they're seeing. That's how we change the world, one person at a time. I absolutely believe every single one of us can do that. And it was no different when I took over as chief of police, as I told you. Murder capital, crime capital. Could Devon Clunis fix all of that on his own? No, but I got almost every single member of the organization to feel that they had power to make a difference. And most of the grand ideas, and I tell people clearly that they said that I implemented, they did not come from me. They came from people like Dr. Christmas and other members. When you create the right environment, it is amazing what happens. And when I said earlier that I want to see Winnipeg being that shining example, Shauna, what we want to do after this is continue to have conversations like this, ongoing across our city, and create that sense where every single Winnipegger knows that they can impact a single life and we can fully transform our city. And I hope people will be looking at the city of Winnipeg and saying, what's going on there, and come and learn from us. So yes, we can change our city and we can change the world. Each one just touch one. And every single one of us can do that.
Can I add to that?
Please.
So I agree. And like I said, it's when you're working hands-on with people at the ground level, it's easy to talk about compassion because you can see the direct results. I wanted to mention a story. You know, we get affirming, validating experiences and stories on a regular basis, which is super inspiring. And I wanted to mention my team are here tonight. We had just a glowing, inspiring example of the fruits of compassion. Just last week, a young lady who, I'll just say she was very down and out, medically challenged, and really out of it, soiled. My team embraced her. They created a safe place for her, so safe, in fact, that she kept coming back. And she came back after several visits over the course of a year. Last week, she came back just to say thank you to them. And I wish I could play the video for you right now because it would break your heart. And it's those kind of individual efforts that really inspire me. That's why, you know, I don't have a religious basis in saying I think that when you save one person, you save all of humanity. But that resonates for me exactly for the reasons that Devon is talking about. And I also would like to comment about the power of vulnerability. And I think that's the challenge that we all face, that in order for us to really shake that NIMBY attitude and really take responsibility and feel a sense of ownership over some of the scourges that we have going on in our society, we have to acknowledge our denial of it and acknowledge that we're oblivious to it. And that takes some strength and courage, I think, to have that vulnerability. So I feel it really resonates for me, the practice that we have in our team. I was very fortunate that I had a lot of latitude setting this up, and I brought on like-minded people. So we have a permanent sharing circle in our office where we unpack and talk about these things on a daily basis, including all the social issues and all the individuals that we're working with. And it's truly heartwarming. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for your leadership there. Bob, you just told a story about, and you also told your story. And I think you're all coming to a point where I can begin to reach that one to the stories I tell, or to hearing of stories. Storytelling is such a powerful metaphor and practice. So I'm going to shut up now for a second, and I'm going to turn this mic to anyone in the crowd who would like to ask a question, and I'll run around with it, okay? And just introduce yourself, name, and then give us your question.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Mariette Bear, and I'd like to make a comment and a quote from Mother Teresa. And she said, when you see someone, just remember they're not just a problem, they're a person. And listening to Dr. Christmas here and your team, it's struck me that that's what you do. You see a person, not just a problem. First the person, the dignity, the eye contact.
Thank you.
One thing about this discussion of compassion is that there is another component, I think, called respect. And unless you respect the other person as an equal, really the compassion doesn't mean a lot. I remember being in a conversation where a person was criticizing the amount of money the federal government was giving to First Nations. And I said to him, think of it as rent. And that puts First Nations people on an equal basis. They're a partner in the transaction. And I think unless we see other people in disadvantaged situations as partners and equals, compassion doesn't mean a lot.
So Mike, you have a question then?
Yeah, so I'd like a response. What do you think of that comment?
I agree.
I think I agree too. I think when it's one-on-one, it's easier. When we start thinking about the wars and conflicts in the world and the polarization and the division, we're so far from that recognition of each other. And that movement towards it is hard, but necessary.
Compassion is central to the teachings of pretty much every single or most world religions, whether they're Eastern or Western. And in this country, we're living in a much more secularized world. So I'm wondering, what do you see as the role of religious faiths in compassion leadership?
I could start with that one if you so desire.
First of all, I just want to thank this gentleman in the gray shirt for your comment about respect. I think that is at the heart of everything we're doing, the impassioned work that we're doing, and treating people with dignity as an equal, and never writing somebody off. And my intention behind this story of this young lady, Crystal, was that she looked like she was going to be dead within a few days, and next thing you know, she's all cleaned up and thanking us for. So you just don't know. You can't write people off. So I'll say that I think that everybody in my current team are very spiritual, regardless of which religious background they might affiliate with. I think all of the organized religions contain a structured way to go about life, how to lead a good life, be a good person. So whether that's grounded in Buddhism or Catholicism or whatever religious structure you draw that from, you can draw a framework for living a good life and treating people with respect.
Yeah, for myself, I think everyone, or at least most people, would know that I was a police chaplain. I am a Christian, but I was never about trying to get anyone to believe what I believe, but I was very clear that I treated people the way that I did. I acted the way that in terms of integrity because of my faith. And so it is my faith that drives me to want to treat people with a sense of compassion, because I believe that's what I'm put here to do good. And so this whole sense that we are one, no matter what we call ourselves, I see first our humanity. And for me, that is how I try to live out my faith. I'm here to love every single person.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Pepper Pretty. So I'm not worried about you or anybody in this room. I think that we're kind of all on the same page. At the risk of being a little cynical today, too. So please forgive me, but I'm worried about everybody else. And I'm worried about the people who don't have compassion or respect and have no interest in it, because at the end of the day, compassion is the action, right? Caring, you do have to care. You can act compassionately and fake it, and a lot of people do. And there's some benefits to that as well. And in terms of leadership, though, I think that, I mean, you set an example, you set a standard, you set an expectation. And I think that where the state of the world is right now is that we no longer have that same standard and expectation, and we are giving license and encouragement for the opposite of respect and the opposite of compassion. And there's a benefit to policing compassion. There's a benefit for regulating compassion. I don't trust humanity right now to have the intrinsic drive to be compassionate, or if they do, it's selective compassion, which maybe we could talk a little bit about, that selective compassion, because the Pollyanna worldview that we're all going to, help each other and I don't think that we're there right now. So in the meantime, I feel like the world is falling apart in a lot of ways, and so Canada, where we're at right now, I think that one of the benefits that we have is that we are still regulating compassion. We are still mandating it. We do have those expectations. I know, Dr. Christmas, there's nobody on your team that would pull a stunt of being discriminatory or non-judgmental or cause harm. There would be consequences. There isn't consequences for everybody, and I think that we need to focus on, well, maybe not focus, but I do think that we need to value and to advocate for the regulation and the policies that we have that are mandating the compassionate actions of people.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Taeuk Bae. The problem about compassion, what I'm thinking is the boundary. It's easy to show compassion to my people, but it seems to be very hard to show the compassion to not my people. So it seems to be easier to say, making my family, my race, my ethnic group, my nation great, but it's so hard out of that. So my question is so big, but what's your strategy?
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
Because I absolutely appreciate and understand what you're saying. I think part of the issue is, as I told you, there's some 82 plus individuals from across Canada and the US who are here with me right now in Jamaica. The vast majority have no familial or ancestral connection to the island. They just feel the compassion for the people. I think the problem that we have right now is that the negative gets most of the spotlight. I think many of us are very compassionate to people outside of our immediate cultural group, but that doesn't really get the news. The minute there's something that feeds clickbait, well, that's what gets the news. You'll find that even right now in our city. I do believe that it's the negative that we consistently feed. I feel that Winnipeg really is a wonderful place to be, but it's the negative that gets the spotlight. If we start reporting more of these compassionate acts or acts of kindness, I think that will drive additional acts of kindness. People will realize they're not on their own, and they'll realize that people outside of their own ethnic or cultural group truly care. We're going to see humanity first. Call me naive after almost 39 years in this field, but I still believe there's far more good in our world, but we just don't see enough of it being reported in the news, or we don't spend enough time reading those stories. I think that's what we would like to do in our city.
It's not that I disagree. I know. I feel pretty powerless, to be frank. I feel I have young children. I have a 10-year-old still and a 14-year-old, and I grew up in this city in the 80s feeling very, very safe. And I sat in a pretty privileged position where I was in the city to feel that safety, but I felt safe. And I don't hold the same comfort for my children or their futures that I lived in. And I don't, for all the work I do, and I keep pushing every day, and I appreciate what you're doing, Devon, and what you're doing, Bob, and what so many people in this room are doing, but it's, the movement of the world is indeed feeling very far from compassionate leadership in particular, from those making the big decisions in so many places that have reverberations. And I think what worries me on the ground here is seeing how that plays out when people I know move away from compassion, when people I know just feel scared or angry at that lack of power and helpless to see change come through by way of compassion. And it's easier, as I said at the beginning, I called it siloed compassion or directed compassion to those you know and understand or you feel a direct connection to. It's harder to feel compassion to those you disagree vehemently with. It's harder to feel compassion when you're feeling threatened. It's harder to feel compassion and push to compassion when you're not feeling it from anyone around you. And I think those are the spaces where we need these conversations, and we need more of these conversations as reminders and as movement towards it in any inkling we can find to have hope and to find that optimism you asked about at the beginning, Devon, like to see something moving forward. I teach public international law, and it can be overwhelming at times, and I always remind the students, but we're looking at the long-term progress. And we're in one of those moments right now where we're feeling a little bit backwards, but there is still hope, and there is still that sort of capacity and understanding for compassion. And yeah, when you go to the religious texts, none of this is new. None of this has not been understood for thousands of years and written long ago in many ways. And yet still all those articulations seem to find ways to battle each other in problematic ways. So I don't not feel hope, but I feel the real sort of heaviness of just simply saying we can just be more compassionate and things will be better. And the one-on-one, I think all that work on the ground has reverberations and movement, but I think we have to fight for the spaces for dialogue a little louder. I think we have to really work at making these conversations happen.
Before we go on, Pat Lee? Pepper, you had a question, and I'm not sure if we answered or anyone responded to your question. Would you mind repeating that question, and out of respect, let us hear her question? That was the question. Was that the question?
Yeah, that was pretty close. Yeah, and it was more of a
Thank
general and just really around that that leadership piece. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Shauna. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name is Nicholas. I was a graduate student at PAX here at St. Paul College, and I'm really grateful for these opportunities of keep having these conversations. I was thinking a little bit about the concept of compassion and where it comes from. So if I'm not wrong, it comes from Latin, and it means to feel with, right? To feel with. in this case, to feel with others, to be able to feel with others. I think it's very, if we think about it, it's a pretty basic concept. And if we apply this to two main concepts, first religion and then politics, I think they can be powerful sources of compassion, as we have said in this room. We have mentioned somehow that, for example, religion could be a wonderful source of compassion. But sometimes religion and politics take a kind of dark tweak, and they forget about compassion. How can we remind politics and religion that compassion should be at the heart of those of practicing any faith or any political system?
I could comment briefly on that. How do we keep the concept alive? By keeping the discourse going and keeping the narrative going around it so it stays in the forefront of people's consciousness. That we all, like I said, we all do it in our own ways. I try to do it with my writing and some speaking opportunities. Devon embodies it. Shauna's facilitating it, from what I can see, in a great way by bringing students together for an open discourse around the right ideas, the difficult conversations. And I think on an individual and in a small group basis and in a formal way, we can create spaces for those discussions, as Shauna mentioned, so that they don't fade into the background, they stay in the forefront of our consciousness as we're doing our work.
I agree with what Clunas was saying, that each one of us has the power to change the world. And so I try, I'm not totally successful, but I try to do random acts of kindness. You never get the reward for doing that except personally when and you can say, Mom, I did the right thing. Do you agree, Mom? My mom's dead. Still, random acts of kindness end up being the first step of acting compassionately.
I just want to say yes, absolutely doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
I just want to say thank you to Ms. Baer for your acknowledgement and kind words. And further to the gentleman in the gray shirt, yes, respect earns respect. And that is kind of the premise that we have been using within our team. You know, hearing some of what Shauna said and what the lovely lady at the back, she's left, definitely feel the weight and the divide. And that's something that we've been trying to guard against, so that our team can be healthy in our hearts and our minds. And you know, yes, we have our different faith systems or beliefs or moral compass that we're trying to honor amongst ourselves in the circle. You know, the respect earns respect occurs within our team, within each other, and out on the street. You know, something that I always would abide by as a police officer. And, you know, feeling that weight that you talk about, Shauna, like that, you know, my kids are 17 and 19. And there's been like drastic change, but I want to be hopeful. And like Devon's talking about, like hope is all that we can rely on and try and instill in people. And so Crystal is an excellent example. When Bob said he wished he could show the videos, because Dale here on her first day with our team is, you know, the first one to jump to help Crystal. And I'll tell you, the dignity that she was shown, you know, by us, and she did come back multiple times, and it was exhausting. And there was times where we were like, okay, we got to set some boundaries here, and it was really difficult. And it took a lot of compassion and care to set aside, you know, biases and whatnot, because she was very difficult. And just maintaining that and doing the right thing every time is something that we talk about within our team. And, you know, we don't get to see the fruits of our labor, but planting that seed, you know, we can say, you know, that's an apple tree, but until you nurture it and keep being consistent and showing that care and love, until you actually see the apple, like, there it is. So I think Crystal was an excellent example of that, and we have so many more, and only in less than 2 years that we've been able to do that. So I think that we are making change, and that's just in our tiny team. So all the people out there, I mean, we have an impact with politicians and, you know, whatnot. So we're all doing our piece.
Thank you.
Can I just say briefly to add to that? Thank you, Christine. I've been thinking and talking quite a bit lately about building organizational culture, and how do you build a culture of compassion? You know, another aspect of this whole discussion is how do you lead with compassion? And culture is a powerful thing within an organization, whether it's big or small. And it's not built by rules or a vision and mission statement. It's built by what you tolerate, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior on a day-by-day basis, so that people feel and understand what is the actual heart and the intention behind the work we're doing. So we've worked hard in our team to encourage a culture of compassion by telling people, you go out there, and if you find an opportunity that you can hold somebody's hand or help them, and if it takes 5 hours, then it takes 5 hours. So this is where I'm coming back to the original comments I made about not building systems and then serving the systems that we build rather than the people. I think we need to meet people where they're at and build the systems of resources around them so that we're being client-centered and not system-centered. So the leading with compassion, I think, means leading by example and being clear about, as Dr. Amelidis said, being clear about what your vision and mission and intention is. And so I've worked hard personally on that. I know my colleagues have here, and we're seeing the fruits of it because we get these heartwarming pictures from the street every day and videos of a safety officer pushing a wheelchair, you know, through the snow, and it's just heartwarming. So I think it starts, like Devon says, with the individuals, and if we can show that kind of compassion for one individual as an individual or as a group or as a city or as a country, then we're all growing the heart in our society around compassion. And I think it comes back to also just keeping the narrative and the discourse around it going.
I think we're coming close to the end. One more question. Thank you, sir.
All of you have been in this business of serving others for a long time, and in life there's cycles. Have you noticed in your careers that there are cycles when the window opens, when the heart is bigger in society, not just individuals but overall? And what do you notice at that time when the window opens, where you can maybe make more progress to get more people involved, as opposed to maybe currently when others are creating a dialogue that other people are biting onto, and that dialogue is not really that great right now in some ways. Does that make sense, what I'm asking? Okay.
I
could start. Go ahead,
Go
Shauna.
ahead, Devon. I know it's hard for online.
I can't say that I've noticed any particular cycle. I just know right now, based on the conversation I've had as across this country and some in the US, that the vast majority of people, despite what we see on the news, they want to change. They want a compassionate, caring society, both Canadian and Americans. And that's why I feel the time really is ripe. As Shauna said, I think what's missing are conversations, safe places to have these types of discussions. This is why we need to create that in our city. I believe really is an opportune time. Not that I've seen any type of cycle, but right now with what's going on, we need to realize, okay, we had COVID, where people went through some very difficult things during COVID, but no opportunity to come together to have a debrief thereafter. Then in terms of policing, we had the George Floyd event. Huge divide between police and community. We've never come together to talk about those two seismic events. And I think we need to do that to help healing to start and for us to move forward. This is an incredibly opportune time.
I haven't really talked too much about my work with refugees, but I've been working on refugee resettlement issues for over 20 years at this point. And there was a time before Canada was responding to Syrian refugees. There was a time when I told my friends what I worked on or that I studied private sponsorship and no one knew what that was. Well, not even the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, and suddenly in the horror and tragedy of a washed up boy on a beach who wasn't saved, whose family had connections to Canada and people could see the potential, and suddenly people wanted to help, and there was a surge of reaction in this country towards private sponsorship. There was a change in government. That change in government started with a bigger welcome to refugees and a bigger response that was from both the government and private citizens than we had seen in a long time, and that reverberated in so many ways. And then in terms of the one-on-one connections that Devon and Bob have been talking about, people met refugees. They sponsored refugees for the first time. They realized they were just like them and made friendships. And there was a change and an expansion. And now, unfortunately, we're not in that moment anymore. And we're at a retraction, and there are greater obstacles to protection and limits on numbers. And in terms of who gets in and who doesn't, where attention is paid and where it's not, we're not seeing it again. And so there's these cycles that you can't quite figure out how to move back to that different moment of welcome in a moment that is simply not the same moment of welcome. And there's compassion, and there's a sense of fear that triggers some of the reactions, and there's different messagings and political relationships with our neighbors that affect all of this. But I have seen those waves of different responses in the 80s too. At that point, the sort of in the 70s, even the Indo-Chinese, the Cambodian, Vietnamese, and Laotian response was an early inkling of that we've repeated. And I think in our welcome to outsiders, or our exclusion of outsiders in different moments in this country, we can see those different waves of compassion, absolutely.
Thank you, Shauna. And I want to find a way to bring this to a close and create a new beginning, right? Speaking of refugees, my wife and I, who have been married now for 45 years, came on the last Air Canada flight out of Uganda at the age of 13, and it was called Mercy Flight Number 13. That was what it was called, Mercy Flight Number 13. Now, what a concept, that Canada. So, how do we bring this to a close? And perhaps I can just share my takeaway from what I heard. It's what I bring this to a close. You might have other takeaways. we began with this notion of NIMBYism. It's thrown out there. And then we proceeded to talk about the key, as Devon so clearly put it, that the key to the many is the one. Is the one. And all 99 is a one. Then we heard Shauna speak about, I am in my classroom. I work with my students. How do I raise the consciousness and keep them safe? In a curious way, I think we come back to that backyard. The way we begin to initiate change, from what I hear you're saying, is to begin in our backyard. What's facing me in my here and now? And what can I change? And what courage it is calling for me. And I thank you for reminding us about that, the moral courage that we need. And the many who have showed moral courage were assassinated. We know that history. So it's a tough place to be. And I'm so thankful to be in this organization called the Mauro Institute, because it creates opportunities just for this. And so thank you so very much. And can you indulge me in one story before you go? Because I was thinking, should I share the story? But I think in praise of hope. I share this story in praise of hope. Now, this was about, in 2023, academics applying for, there's a conference, we submit our proposals for a conference, and I proposed doing a workshop for those who are engaged in the work of peace, peacemakers. But the gap between what they choose, what they seek to aspire, and what they're experiencing, as a gap. How do we support them in that work? Now, in this conference, there were about 2,000 people, and generally, if you get about 15 that come to your workshop, you're laughing. For this one, I had about 40-some folks show up. So we had rearranged the rooms, and there was no way we could go around and introduce each other. 1 minute, it'll be 40 minutes already. So I said, well, how about we begin with just one or? That's all I could say. One stood up and said, here's the context here. The paper was accepted in July, and the workshop was taking place in October 14th, and what happened in between, October 7th. All right, so now we come in here, and I completely didn't even pay attention to that. One person stood up and said, I am Israeli, I live in the States, and I need you all to know that I do not feel good about being here. So why did she come? I don't know. Another one said, well, I'm a Palestinian, and I feel that same way. And another one stood up and said, well, I'm an Israeli and married to a Palestinian, and you should listen to me. Now, I'm supposed to be the facilitator. And before I knew it, I lost control. You don't understand. If only you would listen. And it kept going on that way. Now, I'm a Catholic, practicing Catholic. I looked up. I said, you got to help me out here. My spiritual advisors always told me, be careful what you ask for. So, and here's what happened. And everything else that happened then was simply spontaneous. I could not see myself as being a part of this group. So what I did as a facilitator, I broke the rules of facilitation and I pulled myself out of that circle. And when I did that, what are you doing? You should be here, not out. Loud, ignored. Now, this was in Vancouver, so it's a beautiful view. So I went to the window, and I did something that was unanticipated, even for me. I began to, and thank the good Lord for that, I think, I began to hum to the words that I didn't know and sing to the words I knew, the prayer of St. Francis, make me a channel of your peace. Are you crazy? Are you pushing religion on us? I ignored that. I learned that I needed to be crazy if not being crazy meant staying and arguing and shouting at each other. So I broke the norm. I knew that, not at that moment, but later. But here's what happened, and this is what keeps me grounded in hope. Here's what happened. Some in the group started humming along with me. Some in the group came up to where I stood and started humming along with me. And you can see, it's been on for a while, and the person who screamed, "Are you crazy?" stormed out, but the rest remained. There was a bit of a calm. It was as if they knew that they needed to search their own hearts and minds and souls. We went, we had coffee, we had water. How do I now begin with that? We began to sit down, and I did not want to go down the road of, well, what happened here? But I asked them, what was your experience like? What was your experience like in that situation? And my goodness, the responses we got was phenomenal. That got translated into a book. But nevertheless, I share that story with you only to say that we can only work in our own backyard, and we cannot lose hope. We simply cannot. But every single act that you do is, for me, like a stone that's thrown in the water. And then there is a ripple, and a ripple. And I thank you all panelists, Shauna, Bob, Devon, for being that stone to create that ripple. Don't you think so? Let's give them a hand. So there's coffee, there's water, there's fruits, please, and they will love to answer all your questions. Come around, and Shauna especially is dying to talk to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.